What are some of dark events happened in history not many people know about? In the early 80s, Bayer knowingly sold millions of dollars worth of HIV and hepatitis-tainted medications to Asia and Latin America. These countries didn't have laws to prevent the proliferation of tainted drugs. Thousands of people died as a result. It was hardly mentioned on any news platforms. YouTube link. Oddly enough, they don't list that particular event in their otherwise fairly detailed history. Disgusting. Web link. Once in the 70s, a film crew was filming an episode of The $6 Million Man, and they were shooting at an amusement park funhouse kind of thing. A stagehand was moving what he thought was a prop wax figure on a noose, only for one arm to fall off, revealing human flesh and bone underneath. After an autopsy, it was revealed to be the 60-something-year-old corpse of an old Wild West outlaw that had been taxidermied to an extent. Edit. Thanks for the award. A lot of Sam O'Nella fans, huh? To be specific, it was the corpse of Elmer McCurdy, the "You'll Never Take Me Alive" guy. Wait, what? Who did the taxidermy and how did it end up at the amusement park? He was an executed criminal. Which I guess people back then saw as exempting them from any obligation to treat his corpse with respect. So it became a carnival attraction. Over the years, public taste for such exhibits waned, and at some point it got stuck in a haunted house as just another prop, then forgotten. From memory and some conjecture, I read about the case before, but I couldn't cite sources or anything. Fun fact. That is sort of what outlaw means. It means you are now deemed to be outside of the protections that any jurisdiction's law has for you. Like the right to a trial and whatnot, which is why even any person killing them was legal. They killed someone who had no protections from the law. The whole concept of outlaw is now considered heavily unconstitutional, obviously. The ideal maternity home here in Canada. From the 1920s till the 1940s, they took in babies from unwed mothers and they were selling them especially to desperate Jewish families in New Jersey. Adoption was illegal in the US back then. It was later discovered that the people who ran this business would starve the unmarketable babies by feeding them only molasses and water. The babies would last around 2 weeks on this diet. They put the corpses in wooden boxes often used for butter, and that's why the victims are called the butterbox babies. The boxes were either buried on the property or at sea or burned in the home furnace. The parents who gave their child to this maternity home would go back and see how their child is doing, but were told the child has died when in fact it had been sold to adopting parents. Between 400 and 600 died in that home, and at least 1,000 were adopted, but sadly, the adopted babies often suffered from diseases because of the unsanitary conditions and lack of care at the home. Oh, kind of like the in Ireland. Web link. The Halifax Explosion. Regarded by many as the biggest man-made explosion prior to the invention of the atomic bomb. A ship laden with explosives collided with another vessel in Halifax Harbor. The resulting explosion flattened much of the city's downtown core, killing roughly 2,000 and injuring 9,000. The blast is said to have temporarily displaced the water in the harbor, forming a tsunami that reached up to 15 meters high, surging over the wreckage of the waterfront. The following day, Halifax was hit by a blizzard that dumped 40 centimeters of snow on top of the city, further complicating rescue efforts. The city is also home to a cemetery where many victims of the Titanic were laid to rest. It is said that the body identification system developed at the time of the Titanic's sinking in 1912 aided efforts to identify victims of the Halifax explosion in 1917. Hold up the train. Ammunition ship afire in harbor heading for Pier 6, and will explode. Guess this will be my last message. Goodbye, boys. Vincent Coleman, train dispatcher, his last words. His sacrifice stopped a train carrying around 100 people from approaching Halifax, and is sending the message to as many stations as possible, hoping one of them would relay it in time, spread the word of the disaster before it even happened, meaning emergency forces mobilized sooner than they would have otherwise. On a more heartwarming note, one of the cities that rushed to Halifax's aid was Boston. Halifax has always had a big Christmas tree market, and ever since then, every year, they send a special one to Boston as thanks. And every year, Boston makes it the city's official tree. I live in Boston, and the Christmas tree tradition is the reason I've heard about the Halifax explosion before. I thought I heard that people in Boston could hear the explosion, but I haven't found anything to back that up, so I might be mistaken. Didn't the ship's anchor fly halfway across the province? It flew about 2.5 miles across the city and landed in what is now a park. There's even a monument set up with the 1,140-pound anchor shaft still there on display. I think there might be other sites around the city where more parts from the ships landed, but the anchor is definitely the most well-known. Bystander: oh no, this giant anchor is in our park. What should we do? City official: you mean premium anchor statue? To be fair, such events deserve a monument. Even without all the death and damage. A big ship anchor that flies 2.5 miles, 4 kilometers, and lands in a park is insane. In my family's region in Africa, they used to carry out the death penalty by snakebite. Just a snakebite to each ankle, and then letting the man spend his remaining time with his family before he died, under supervision. I thought it sounded sort of humane in a way, like our lethal injections, but apparently they say it was one of the most horrific ways that existed. The most horrific part is that your family watches this death. Letting the man spend his remaining time with his family here really means making him die a slow, agonizing death in front of his family. Man, that makes it a whole lot worse actually. Do you know why it was one of the most horrific ways to die? What happens after they get bit? According to Cedars-Sinai, whether the snake is venomous or not, the area around the wound is likely to be itchy, painful and swollen. Venomous bites may also lead to nausea, vomiting, numbness, weakness, paralysis, and difficulty breathing. It depends on the snake they used, but long story short, it hurts the entire time you die, which may take up to a week. A week? Depends on the snake. Some have primarily neurotoxic compounds in their venom, some have hemotoxins, or it can be both. Anyway, they are very painful, either because they affect nerve cells directly or because they cause inflammation and necrosis. Hemotoxic venom clots blood like. YouTube link. My coworker got stung by an Arizona bark scorpion. The sensation is described like electricity constantly shooting through the affected area. Not usually fatal. Venomous snake can also begin to shut down respiratory functions, and other organ functions, I would imagine, probably paired with intolerable pain all over. The death of Roger Williamson, at the 1973 Dutch Grand Prix. In the 1970s era of Formula One, the cars weren't far off from being an overpriced metal coffin on wheels, surrounded by highly flammable fuel, and during the Dutch Grand Prix, this became painfully obvious indeed. Roger Williamson crashed out after a tire puncture, and his car came to rest upside down, with him trapped inside. He was not seriously hurt by the crash, but then the fuel tank ignited and the car burst into flames. Another driver named David Purley was behind Williamson when the crash occurred, and he saw the whole crash unfold. Purley stopped his car on the other side of the track, ran across an active racetrack, and proceeded to try and save Williamson's life. This is where the dark part of it comes in, and depending on your sensibilities, downright outrageous and disgraceful. None of the trackside marshals had any fireproof equipment, which prevented any of them from helping Purley to right the burning car. They also had a grand total of one fire extinguisher between them, which was incapable of putting out the flames. Additionally, not a single other driver who saw the calamity stopped to help, despite Purley's frantic waving to them, to try and get anyone to assist in saving Williamson's life. Meanwhile, race control decided not to halt the race despite a flaming wreck being present on track, and it took almost 10 minutes before the fire engine arrived on site, by which point, Williamson had asphyxiated from the smoke and flames. As soon as the fire was out, they simply put a blanket over the burned-out car and continued racing. Later on, other drivers and the race controllers would claim that they assumed Williamson's car was actually Purley's, and that there was no one at risk at that time, something that the many hundreds of people within the grandstands would strongly disagree with. Yeah, Williamson burned to death right in front of a grandstand packed with spectators, who all got a front row seat to watching Williamson die before their very eyes. So there you have it, a young, promising driver slowly being burnt alive over the course of 10 minutes, a second driver desperately trying in vain to save his life, a group of marshals woefully under-equipped for the job, indifferent drivers, incompetent race control, and a disaster which shook Formula One to its core. As a result of this debacle, Changes were made to try and avoid this type of event occurring again in the future. The biggest change was the mandate that marshals should wear fireproof clothing, and it was also noted that drivers were more willing to stop at accident sites to assist in rescuing fellow drivers. This was most clearly seen during the 1976 German Grand Prix at the Nürburgring Nordschleife, where Guy Edwards, Harold Erdl, Brett Lunger and Arturo Merzario all pulled over to assist in getting Niki Lauda out of his burning Ferrari, after the infamous crash that took him out of the German, Austrian, and Dutch Grands Prix. This is what was so scary about Bahrain last year. Knowing what had happened and no cameras on the wreck. So glad Grosjean came out relatively unscathed. I saw that crash live, and it was terrifying. I was massively relieved to see Grosjean emerging from the flames and into the ambulance on his feet. The VIPE home experiment. Sweden are mostly known as a not very scary country, with good and mostly accessible dental care. Well, part of how that came to be is this: hey, you are institutionalized and suffering and powerless, let's make your teeth rot out of your skull. For science. Web link. Many younger folks may hold that view of Sweden. For us slightly older and who have done our homework, we know Sweden's closet is bursting with skeletons. Good old eugenics, isn't it? Sweden officially closed their last eugenics program in 2012 if I recall correctly. The Radium Girls. In the 1920s, they worked at a watch company painting the hours on the watches using radium, a radioactive element that glows in the dark. They did this with no PPE and weren't told radium is dangerous. Meanwhile, the chemists had full PPE and worked in a sealed environment. Worse, they were instructed to lick the tip of the brush to make a very fine point. Some of them would paint their nails or their teeth with it for fun when they went out at night. They would develop cancer whenever the paint touched, and many of them had such decay in their jaws that their mandibles had to be held on with bandages. Edit. Apparently there's a new movie about this, as many Redditors have helpfully pointed out. It's still an ongoing problem in the area too. I used to do radon testing for home inspections there, and it's not a safe place to live. Worst I saw was a condo on the edge of a golf course. They donated the radioactive leftover fill to make parks. It tested at about a 13.2, and the legal limit was 0.6. Kuk Kai Kai, or the chicken poop prison in Thailand. Used by French forces to hold political prisoners, rebellious Thai people, in the Chontaburi region. The long-standing impacts of this much-feared torture are still felt in the region today. There's a Thai saying for those who buck authority that roughly translates to be careful not to get caught in a chicken poop prison. I learned about this prison from my parents, who learned about it from theirs. How it worked was there was a small, 2-story prison. Bottom floor houses the prisoners, and the top floor is basically a huge chicken coop. The grated floor/caling ensures that the chicken poop falls onto the prisoners below. Apparently, even though the maximum sentence in Kuk Kai Kai was around a week, it was one of the most feared punishments there was. As someone who has cleaned out chicken coops before, that's effing horrific. The stench is insane and definitely toxic. Is it a different sort of smell than dog poop or cow poop? What is it like? So much worse. Doesn't smell like feces really, more like something rotten yet burns your nose at the same time. There's a crap ton of nitrogen and ammonia in chicken poop. The nitrogen and ammonia are what make the sort of cat pee mixed with garden vegetable compost rot smell, but the ammonia is why it burns your eyes, nose and makes you cough like crazy when you breathe too much of it. 5 years raising a modest flock of 15 as a teenager, spring clean out of the coop was agony. Chickens only have one hole, so everything comes out together. It is an acidic wet poop/pee combo. It is the smell of ammonia, sulfur, and decomposition mixed together. If there is a lot, it will sort of ferment and get hot, releasing some chemicals that sting your eyes and nose. Rodents also like to make nests in it. The January 1945 sinking of the MB Wilhelm Gustloff. It was a German ship carrying fleeing Germans from the Eastern Front to the west through the Baltic Sea. It was sunk by the Soviet Navy shortly after setting sail. The total death toll is unknown but estimated at over 9,000 since there were so many stowaways. It is the worst maritime disaster ever, several times more than the Titanic. It didn't get nearly the press because they were the enemy, so who cares, and the Nazi media certainly didn't report it because they're at the waning days of a war they're badly losing, so the last thing they need is more hits to their already sinking morale. Overall, I think it's not really taught how the Germans were actively fleeing the Soviet advance and trying to surrender to the Western Allies. This is pretty common knowledge if you have an interest in World War II, but I don't think it's something they go over in high school curriculum or anything. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to be the first to know about Red Rabbit Reader's new videos. If you like our videos, please like them on YouTube and share them with your friends. We welcome your comments below. Press to start another of our videos.